And there we are, live with Dr. Rob Neal, world-renowned golf biomechanist. Doctor, thank you for coming on. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. And you know, as we talked about just a little bit in the pre-show, I've been a very big fan of yours and your work for quite some time, and we have a lot of mutual friends, and a lot of them have been on. And Trillium was the one who, without hesitation, when I asked her who I need to have on next, she said you. And I'm very interested to hear a lot about your work and your research with Lane and the work that you've done on wedges, and you have a website called Wedgecraft, if I'm not mistaken.
Wedgecraft.com, yeah.
Yep.
So the initiative that Lane and I began about 8 years ago was in response to the fact that there didn't seem to be good evidence to base coaching on or to provide to students in this part of the game. And so we really took a deep dive into understanding what the best players in the world did. And so it started out with a kind of a monumental effort to collect data on the best wedge players that we could get access to. So world number ones or former world number ones, guys who are recognized as being phenomenal with this instrument. You know, so, and then across generations. So as old as Tom Kite, who, if anyone remembers, was a phenomenal player with a wedge, and he was the one who first actually used a lob wedge on tour.
Mm-hmm.
Titleist up until those days only produced a 56-degree wedge. That was the maximum loft. And he, along with Dave Peltz, convinced them to build a 60-degree wedge for Tom to use. And so that's the birth of the lob wedge as we know it these days. And just about every tour player has that in their bag. And so we wanted to be able to give coaches and players the right information on what they needed to do short game. And so we went about this effort to collect the data of these players hitting different shots. So on the fairway length turf at 10, 20, 30, 50, 75, and 100-yard carry. Mm-hmm. And then out of the rough from 10, 20, and 30 yards. We didn't do the distance wedges out of the rough. And then bunkers carry distances of 10, 20, and 30 yards. So we collected high-speed video, 3D data on the body and the club. And then we always used a launch monitor where possible. And sometimes, like for example, in the bunker, it's not very much data you get from a launch monitor. It's hard to get the ball data. With the Foresight Sports GC Quad, we were able to get some club delivery information as well. So, but it's still pretty messy because those devices often rely on seeing ball movement to decide that they've actually got a shot. And so when you get this mass of sand moving and obscuring the ball, they often don't trigger. And so there's a limited amount of launch monitor data for the bunker. But anyway, it was an interesting journey. And so the outcome of that was really what is being created for players and coaches at our website called wedgecraft.com, which is a collection of 3 videos at this point, and we're adding more as we go along. First was a 12-week digital wedge workshop, which covered all aspects of wedge play. Then we did a bunker catalog, and then the most recent one was one on fairway wedges. So these are specifically distance wedges, probably 60 to 100-yard type shots. And next month, we will film a really in-depth look at finesse wedges, which are those little delicate shots around the green from, inside 30 yards, basically. So
is the wedge game and the short game, because in the last couple of years, the distance and speed training have gotten all the focus, and that seems to be, and now with the ruling body's decision to do whatever rollback they're going to do, I don't think anybody really knows for certain what that decision meant. But is the low-hanging fruit for golfers across the spectrum from higher handicaps to touring pros, do you, or have you found that it's easier for them to lower their average by whatever amount they need to, a tour pro, a quarter shot around, and an amateur, a couple strokes around, utilizing something in the short game as opposed to hitting it 25 yards longer?
Yeah. Well, there's pretty strong evidence that Mark Brody developed to show that if you hit it further, it gives you an advantage.
Mm-hmm.
The closer you are with your next shot, the more likely you are to hold the one that follows. So, but I think to really take full advantage of the fact that you might hit it further is that you need to be then perhaps better with a wedge than you were before, because you'll get more opportunities to use that club. And then I would say for amateur golfers, they are very poor in the finesse wedge zone.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So they typically, I would say, waste many shots in a round by poor execution, poor decision making in the finesse wedge zone. So yes, there's certainly a great opportunity to lower your scores and perhaps gain more enjoyment by becoming better at that part of the game.
Yeah, most amateurs, and we'll lump amateurs as a very big group, from scratch all the way to 20 handicap. But most amateurs, on average, are only going to hit maybe half the greens in a round that they play. Mm-hmm. So as all the data came out, and obviously Mark's work is exceptional, that if you hit it longer or and you're going to hit shorter clubs in, that is going to benefit your game. And it's very hard to argue that. But as you look at the reality of amateurs that play, if they're only hitting half the greens, even if they hit it longer and they're not able to hit their wedges, or they're only going to hit, so they're going to have 9 shots around where they're going to have to chip it or pitch it, mm-hmm. or it's something within that 30-yard to the edge of the green. And I would have to imagine if they spent some time on that it would only benefit them.
Yeah, and then giving them the right concepts of what they need to do is critical to their becoming successful. So I would say a lot of players who develop the yips in their short game have been given incorrect concepts about what they need to do with their body and the club. And that is then the start of this downward spiral that becomes a psychological issue ultimately, but is evidenced by the fact that their technique is different when they go to execute a short game shot. They might make a great practice swing, but then they can't make that same swing or the same movement when they go to play the ball because of the psychological intervention. But it ultimately is a technique issue, because if you hit a bad short game shot, it's most often sourced in poor technique. Now, you could have the right concept and still deliver the club incorrectly. Like, we all hit bad shots, but somehow that has to show up in the mechanics of that particular shot.
Is there a more common thing that people who come to you have their misconception, or their conceptions are wrong? Is there a common denominator that the majority come to you and you like, here's one major thing that we see from person to person?
Yeah, so without a doubt, in the work that Lane and I have done, we've shown that the best finesse wedge players in the world do things differently to the old adages that you might have heard in golf instruction, like keep your head down, stay still. The short shots, they're just a mini version of the full swing, and these are mm-hmm. just totally wrong. So what Lane and I did was developed a hierarchy that we call the control variables that are really about club delivery, and then overlaid on top of that the things that you need to do in order to be able to control a club delivery properly. So, and that was again promulgated on the fact that this is what the best players do. Obviously, it might not necessarily be optimal, but over years and years of the best players doing this stuff, it's probably honing in towards what would be optimal technique. And so concepts like attack angle, well, you have to be able to control the descent of the club. And when we say control, it means there are times when you need to be steep, and there are other times you need to be shallow with the descent of the club or the attack angle. And similarly with shaft lean, there are times when we need to create a lot of shaft lean, and other times when we need to back off and create a little less shaft lean in order to control the trajectory or the launch angle of the ball. And then the other factors are contact point and on the club face angle, which is not really that interesting in a sense, because face angle it needs to be close to 0, which is the direction that you're trying to hit the shot, right? So you can't vary face angle the way you would vary other variables in our control list, because your objective should be to hit it on the line that you're wanting to. However, the face angle control, as an example, is about understanding where the face is pointing on a lofted club when the leading edge is not square to the target line.
Yeah, explain that, because a lot of people don't understand that, especially when they come out to short game and I show them this, and there's no way, if the leading edge is pointed for a right-hander 20, 30, 40 degrees to the right, there's no way the face can be pointed at the target. And so I have the magnetic pointer and I put it on, and they just sit there and they shake their head. They can't believe it.
So whenever you have a loft on a club, then where the loft plane is pointing, which is that little magnet that you talked about, that's that's the way actually a plane is defined, by the normal to it or the perpendicular to that face. And so where that magnetic rod is pointing is where the face is pointing. So when you open up the leading edge, you add loft, which is the purpose of doing the rotating of the face. Is not to open the face up. The purpose is to add loft, and then you need to redirect the loft then to where you want to hit the shot. And there are really two ways of doing that. One is that you would keep the lie angle the same and kind of walk your way around, opening up your stance. And the second way, which is more common amongst the modern day tour players, probably introduced by Sevi, would be to lower the handle. So when you decrease the lie angle, that brings the toe of the club up and then points the loft plane back to the target. So it's not so easy to demonstrate or to describe in words. And your classic example of putting the tool on the face of a wedge is just really empowering to see how, by changing the orientation of the leading edge, you can point the face. You add loft, first of all, so the magnetic rod goes more vertical, but it also points it to the right for a right-handed golfer, and then lowering that handle can bring it back on the target line.
Is lowering the handle more difficult because as you do that, as somebody goes to swing, especially for, let's say, a double-digit handicap and above, that heel is going to catch sooner, and it makes it much more difficult for that level of player to execute?
Yeah, so even with the modern-day wedges that have a lot of heel and toe relief built into the grinds on the bottom of the wedge, Lane and I really advocate for that first method that we talked about, which would be to kind of walk the body around, get it more open to your target line, but have the face pointing back to the towards the target. And then one of the keys to this, Pete, is to make sure that as you open up your stance, that the ball position relative to your body doesn't creep back into your stance. So for the right-hander towards their right foot. That's a common error that I see people making when they're using this method to realign the club face to the target, is that they end up putting the ball further back in their stance, and that brings attack angle and path issues into the fore. And also, you end up taking off loft as well when you put the ball back in your stance. So
if they open their stance, the ball needs to shift what appears to be further forward on that target line. So as the feet are left for a right-hander, the ball's got to shift forward.
So just in real simple terms. So if with your body square to the target line, let's say the ball was an inch inside your left heel, right-handed golfer here. Then as you rotate your body open and get the face pointing now at the target, if you looked at a square body line and then put it perpendicular down to your body line, then it should still be 1 inch inside your left heel for the ball position, rather than typically what happens is it gets more towards the center or even towards the right foot if people just open their stance. So I always describe it as that you need to walk your body around in a little semicircle so that you can keep the ball position appropriate for the shot you're hitting.
It makes total sense because, as you said, the path and the angle and everything change if you don't adjust that ball position to go with your body. And is that to keep the face square to the direction that you want the ball to start in?
And even for wedge shots, the most dramatic or controlling effect of launch direction is club face, not club path. So you need to get the face pointing very close to where you're trying to hit the ball. They say 85% of the start direction is due to the face orientation or the face angle. Right. And even for wedge shots, that's probably pretty much true. Maybe it's a little bit less, depending on how much grip you get on the, or how much friction you get between the ball and the club face, but it's a good rule of thumb. So just get it pointing back pretty much to your target line and you'll be in good shape there.
What do you think? Is they showed a couple weeks back, I think it was at Riviera, when JT, Justin Thomas and Tiger were practicing chip shots and wedge shots around the green, where they're working on hitting a draw type of shot, a standard shot, and then the high cutter that goes higher and hits and releases right. And obviously the draw for as much as you could have a draw on a shot that's only 5 steps off the green, but it's hitting and somewhat rolling out to the left. Is that getting into the specialty and the finesse shots that you mentioned that you and Lane are going to have in your next series on the Wedgecraft site?
Yeah.
Or is that really getting into some high-tech stuff?
Yeah, so we're going to really talk about the critical features in that finesse wedge zone. So, and these activities are really designed around, well, first of all, getting the concept right, but then how do you go and practice this? What drills are appropriate? How do you get good at this part of the game, both technically and then from a skills perspective as well?
When you look at somebody like Victor Hovland, that's such a phenomenal ball striker, and then he really struggles with his short game, but he's making huge strides in his improvement. Is the analysis that we all hear from those on the telecast, is that accurate in that the bowing of the lead wrist is causing him issue in his ability to hit a multitude of shots around the green that he would need at that level? Or do you see something else as you watch that and have an opinion?
Yeah, I think that without being too dogmatic here, is that I don't think the television commentators have got it right. Because you can play all of these shots with a strong grip. Like Jason Duffner is a perfect example of that, and he's got a tremendous finesse wedge game. And historically, there have been people who have been very strong gripped, who've been great wedge players. So
David Duval comes to mind. He was in my age group, my era, that he was a phenomenal short game.
Yeah. So just because you got a strong grip, or you bow your left wrist as a right-hander, that doesn't mean that you're going to be poor with a wedge. But if your body movements don't match with what you need to do to deliver the club properly, then you're in trouble. So I think, another example that comes to mind was Colin Morikawa at the Hawaii event, where he had a tremendous ball striking week. He was well in front going into the final round, and then really struggled with some short game shots there. And I think Brandel Chambly was saying that he's working with Paul Azinger on this, or someone else, and he ended up going to C Lane, and just getting the right information here so that he can better control the attack angle without necessarily changing his grip was key to part of the solution for Colin. So I think that the way in which you need to move your body for finesse wedges is very, very different to anything else in golf.
And what would be an example of that?
So one concept that Lane and I talked about is pivot planing of the upper torso. So during the downswing, as you're rotating towards impact, the center of your upper torso needs to rise and thrust away from the target line, about on the same plane that the club's swinging on.
So the lead shoulder is working upwards and behind you simultaneously.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Which will lift the handle.
Yes, that's the idea.
Okay.
So controlling the angle of attack for finesse wedge shots is the most important thing to be able to do. And on tight grass, particularly into the grain, if you cannot control the attack angle very well, then you're in trouble. Because in that case, you need to be as shallow as you possibly can be so that you get very little leading edge interaction between the turf and the club.
And that goes for all skill levels, I'd have to imagine.
Oh, yeah.
There's nobody immune.
No one is immune for that, no. So if, for example, your upper torso is moving down and towards the ball, then you have to have a mechanism of trying to pull the handle up, and that is often, where the yips develop, and then you start pulling the handle up, and then one you chunk, and the next one you blade, and then this cycle of poor shot, poor result, anxiety, blah blah blah, ends up with the yips, and it can be fundamentally tied back to the fact that you weren't moving your body appropriately for this type of shot.
Is the first, as I followed your materials, as I said, for a many number of years, is the first step in doing that having the more of the weight on the foot closest to the target in your finesse wedge game?
Yeah. I mean, we say 65 to 70% of the weight on the left foot, and for a righty, and then feeling like it never goes back to the right. And
that's even for the higher trajectory shots,
the
flop type shots, as they're commonly referred to.
Yeah, you need to, again, we'll talk for right-handers here, Pete. You need on the backswing to move your body toward the target, left, maybe down a little bit on the backswing, and then on the forward swing, you need to move it up, obviously around, rotated, but
Mm-hmm.
also probably moving the pelvis in and the upper torso away from the target line so that your spine angle is increasing on these shots.
It's almost contradictory to what the majority of people think they need to do. To go back to your idea that most people are doing, that their concept of what needs to be done is
wrong.
completely not is
Yeah.
wrong. Yeah.
Yeah.
To put it bluntly.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And
you're just doing it wrong.
And when you give people the right information and then give them drills and activities to do that will allow them to move their body differently, almost immediately they obtain success. And then you go, well, it's only a matter of you building the confidence and doing enough repetitions now for you to take that from a practice situation to a golf course, and then finally to a golf course when you're playing in a competition.
One of the questions that I got sent in to ask was, as a lot of on your videos on y'all's website, that it starts with a lot of leading edge square to the target line, chipping and pitching and finesse wedge game, where a lot of the common discussion around that is to open up the face, use the bounce, etc. But then you see some of the best chippers and wedge players on the PGA Tour. If we go back and Jordan Spieth, obviously a magician with his wedges. Scotty Scheffler is another one. He keeps the leading edge square for quite a number of his shots. Yeah. And then even Phil Mickelson, who is always very heavy on his front leg, and a lot of times had the leading edge. Now, he liked to open it way up and hit the flop shot, as he's famous for, but he also hit a lot of shots with his leading edge square.
Yeah, lots and lots. People forget that for some reason.
But for some reason that they seem to be viewed on as the outliers and just passed off as, well, they're highly talented and they're child prodigies, and then the general public or anybody else can't do that. But your material speaks to the contrary.
Yeah, I would say the vanilla flavored square chip shot, finesse wedge shot, if you can develop good technique for that, it will hold you in good stead then when you want to get more loft by opening up the leading edge. Make those minor adjustments at setup, use the same technique, and you can probably cover 95% of the short game shots around the green.
Should most people, let's say you take somebody that is a golf fanatic and they live, they live in Florida, they live by you, but they like to go to various places around the country or world and play golf, and they're playing on different grasses. So you have the Northeast, the Midwest, the Southwest, Southeast, the Pacific Northwest. Should they employ different bounces and different style of grinds on their wedges for the different conditions that they play in, or are they okay to use the same wedge regardless of the type of grass that they're playing on, thick rough, tight rough, etc.?
I would say that first of all, if they're grown up on and are playing on Bermuda grass, it's probably the most difficult surface to play off with these finesse wedge shots because of the strength of the grass and the grain and that sort of thing. So if they've got a good combination of technique, then probably they can use any of the grinds and bounces that are available. Right? It's more like those are a bit of insurance for you. So if you're struggling a little bit, then a club with a bit more bounce might help you in softer conditions. Whereas in firm conditions, you probably want to have a little bit less bounce so that you don't run the risk of the club bouncing up into the ball and you catching it thin. But I think that to put it bluntly, I don't think the tour players change the grinds and bounces when they go to different grasses. they get good at using the one implement, and they've got sound technique, then they'll be successful on those surfaces, those different grasses. For the amateur player, I think finding the right combination for you would be good. So if you're used to playing off soft conditions, then a bit of extra bounce will help you. If you're on firm conditions mostly, then go with a little bit less bounce. But something in the middle is probably going to suit most conditions for you. And for the guy who's traveling around and trying all these different golf courses and conditions and so forth, then something middle of the road is probably going to be the best for him or her.
Yeah, I remember, it's hard to believe it'll be 31 years in August that I moved from Michigan to Hilton Head. And obviously the difference in the grasses. And I grew up hitting we called it the cut shot, where you'd hinge your wrist very quickly, and then you'd slide them under the ball, and they'd unhinge on the other side of the ball. But when I came down here and that the ball would sink in that Bermuda grass, and you try to hit that, I don't know how many shots I bladed over the green, just because it wasn't that wispy grass that, the bluegrass or the bent that I was used to, and it would grab it like steel wool, and there it goes 100 miles an hour, 50 yards across the green. So it took me a long time to learn how to control that bottom, as we now call it. Back in the early 90s, there was nothing called controlling the bottom. It's like, well, you can't flip your wrist at it. What about the amount of, how often should people change your wedges? Because it seems that, they fall in love with their wedges, and next thing you know, they have them for 6 years, and you wonder why they can't put spin on the ball.
So, Titleist did a nice study on wear of wedges, and they showed that after about 70 rounds of golf, or the equivalent of 70 rounds of golf, you lose about 25% of your spin capability.
That much?
Yeah, so it depends a little bit on how much you practice and play. And that doesn't mean you have to change every wedge, by the way, right? Like your most used wedge or wedges. So for me, that would be a 60 and a 55 degree wedge. I use those a lot. I probably change them twice a year. For amateur golfers, you've got to think about this as a disposable, a bit like a glove that wears out. And if you're looking for high performance, then you have to play a premium golf ball, and you need fresh wedges. There's no other.
Yeah, because one of the most impressive things that amateurs go ooh and ah and wow over is the pros' ability to hit that shot that usually takes 1-2 bounces and then just scraps, and they put the spin on. And like we have the RBC Heritage coming up in a couple of weeks, and I'll be out there, and the guys will be hitting those shots, and there'll be all the oohs and ahs. And so, I'll ask people, how long have you had your wedge in your bag? How long have you had that Vokey or that Cleveland in your bag? Oh, I've had at least 3 or 4 years. Well, how do you expect to get the spin that they're getting when they're changing them out probably every 4 to 6 weeks? Yep. Now they're practicing a lot more, of course, but you're changing it out every couple of years, and you have 50% of the grooves that you had when you started.
Yeah, exactly right. And under really dry conditions, Pete, the grooves are less important.
Because it's for disbursement of organic matter.
Yeah, and moisture, yeah. But, if you've got any grass that gets caught between the ball and the club face, then you better have those grooves, and they need to be sharp. And the micro milling that they put on there as well all helps to disperse the moisture and the material that influence the friction between the ball and the club face. And don't underestimate how important that ball is. You can't get high spinning wedge shots with a cheap golf ball. Yeah, you have to go to a premium golf ball.
In all the work that you have done, because again, as we get back to people's conceptions of what they think they need to do to be a very good chipper and pitcher of the golf ball, or have a very good wedge and short game, the perception that hitting it high is much better or going to improve them faster as opposed to spin. So can you talk about that a little bit?
So this is the way I kind of illustrate the concept of how spin is important in short game. So I give them a few analogies. Look, if you took a basketball on a bitumen court, outside bitumen court, and you just made a bounce pass without any spin on, just straight bounce pass, when
Mm-hmm.
does that ball stop bouncing? And I usually say, when it hits the fence around the outside of the court, right? Because it just keeps
Mm-hmm.
bouncing forward and forward and forward. Now, that would be what would happen to your golf ball on a hard green. It would just keep bouncing forward and forward until eventually it ran out of energy, which will be over the back of the green. Okay, so now let's just take that basketball and put a lot of backspin on it as you make that bounce pass. And how does it behave then? Well, if you get enough backspin on it, it'll bounce back to you. If you get the sufficient amounts, it'll bounce up in the air vertically, and if you get just a modicum on there, then it'll kind of bounce up, but still forward, but not as much as without spin. So spin is really important in that interaction on the green surface, and the underlying physics say that, well, it's friction that stops the golf ball, right? Friction between the ball and the ground. And with backspin on the golf ball, then the edge of the ball or the surface of the ball that's making contact with the ground is moving faster if it's got lots of backspin than if it has none. And so the frictional force goes up. And so it stops quicker. So the message to golfers is that spin is your biggest friend in short game. Now, if we go back to the other end of the trajectory where the club and the ball are interacting, then how do you get high spinning wedge shots? Well, you need enough pressure between the ball and the club face so that it doesn't slip. And if you deliver too much loft, the ball will slip on the face, it'll launch high, but it won't have much spin. If you de-loft it, you can find this sweet spot where you can launch it at a reasonable height. And when I say reasonable, it's much lower than people think. So maybe 24 to 28 degree launch angle, but it will have its maximum amount of spin at that point. So we're talking about a 75-yard wedge shot that has close to 10,000 RPM of spin on it when hit properly. Now that ball will launch low, but it will land steeply and it will have a ton of spin. So that's your zone for maximal stopping power in the 70 to probably 90-yard zone. Where you're hitting your log wedge.
Even at that distance, you're looking to launch it in that 24 to 30 degree angle.
And although it launches at that angle, it will land closer to 50 degrees because it's in the air long enough that the aerodynamic forces change the trajectory, and the spin on the ball also help to change the trajectory of the shot. So it becomes much less symmetrical, much less parabolic on those types of shots, and launches low and lands steeply. So
and that's because this is the spin holding the ball's trajectory. While it's coming in at a lower trajectory, and then allows it to almost drop.
Yeah, exactly.
So I can kind of paint a picture.
The backspin holds it in the air, allowing the aerodynamic forces to break or to stop it from going forward. So the vertical displacement is governed by gravity, a little bit by the aerodynamic forces, but not very much. But
it kind of reminds me, not to cut you off, it kind of reminds me, just to give people a picture, because that movie Space Cowboys that Clint Eastwood did with Tommy Lee Jones and Donald Sutherland a number of years ago. I don't know if you saw that or not. They were all in their 70s, and it's to be real brief summarization. It's a hilarious movie. If you get a chance, I'd highly recommend it. But they were all astronauts that never got a chance to go to the moon, and now they're brought in to train the younger group of astronauts because there's a satellite that used one of their systems. Well, Tommy Lee Jones is this old time pilot, and he goes through the simulation program of landing the space shuttle when all the systems are out. And of course he crashes it the first time. Well, he says, okay, well, what if I have nothing to use except myself? And they said, okay, try it. So he comes in, and he comes in too hot. He's coming in too low, coming into everything. And he says, well, I'm just going to do this. And they say, you can't, you'll stall out. So he raises the nose so that the whole space shuttle slows down, using the bottom side to slow it down, which I am relating to spin. And then he just drops the space shuttle almost as very close to vertical, and it lands just perfectly fine. When you say that with the lower launch, even with a 60-degree wedge launching 25 to 30 degrees with higher spin, it seems like it hits a point, and then just the descent angle, as you mentioned, is closer to the 55 range, and there's your stopping power.
Exactly right. Yeah. So, and I think it's fair to say a lot of amateurs have the wrong impression of what a flighted wedge looks like, the trajectory. They have a concept that a wedge shot flies high and lands steeply. Well, they got half of it right. It does land steeply, but it doesn't start by launching up high. It starts launching low, but with a lot of spin.
And as far as ball position and shaft lean, so that if somebody's going to listen to this and then they're going to go out to their local range or their short game area and practice, can you give them some idea of where the ball position should be for to start, and then what, let's say, a 15-degree shaft lean, a reference point for them that they can maybe the butt end points to a certain place based off where that ball position is?
That's pretty straightforward. So the ball position should be about center, maybe a fraction forward of center. And when I say center, I always reference the heels rather than the toes, because depending on how much foot flare you have and so forth. So heels. Yeah,
if one lead foot's flared more than the trail, then it shifts and it really throws some people off. Yeah, I agree.
And then if you would imagine the length of your grip, not quite, it's about 9 inches forward, but the grip's about 11 inches, so about a grip length forward with your handle, the top of the handle.
So point it about at your lead front pocket, which would be from the belt button on your pants to your pocket is roughly 9 inches.
Exactly. And so, it's hard to reference where it is on the body, in the sense because your whole body should move toward the target on the downswing. So if you've moved the appropriate amount with your body, then the handle should be somewhere around your left pocket, middle of your thigh, something like that. But in absolute terms, it's about 9 inches movement of the handle forward of where the club head is. So.
And does that, with that ball position and the body's center of mass shifting towards the target, does that make the path a little bit in to out?
It depends on what you did with the upper body and also the wrist.
Yeah, while you're raising the
but
okay.
I would say when you look at the tour player data, the finesse wedges, the path is left. As the shots get longer, that gets closer to zero.
Very interesting. And that's pretty stands out when you look at that data. That's it's like, no, it's like, hey, this is what's happening. There's no interpretation. No. It's like, here's what it is. It is what it is.
Yeah. This is what we measured. It gets it's probably more left with the shorter shots. I'm talking right-handers here. More left with the shorter finesse wedges. As you get out to 30, it's a little bit closer to neutral, and then by 50-yard carry, you're looking at a club path that's very close to zero. And it doesn't start moving out to the right then at 75 or 100. It stays pretty close to zero.
Huh, very interesting. Of all the research that you've done and the data you collected, was there anything that jumped out as very surprising?
Well, I think initially when, going back 8 years, I thought I'd made an error in my calculations when I looked at how much shaft lean players delivered in a distance wedge. I think my first calculations were 15 or 16 degrees. I said, "Oh, this can't be right," because the old stuff was, "Oh no, you don't lean the shaft that far forward with a wedge, but you do." And then the other thing that I thought was really quite interesting as well is that even for finesse wedge shots, there is substantial forward shaft lean. And when I say substantial, 8 to 10 degrees.
That's just it. It's amazing, and it's almost hard to comprehend that you're trying to hit the ball up, but the shaft is up to 10 degrees lean towards the target, which is technically de-lofting.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's de-lofting it for sure. But now, if you're trying to hit it really high, then you have a little bit less shaft lean. But most of the height is gained by opening the leading edge up.
So adjusting the loft.
Yeah.
So you maintain the movement of the body and the shaft. So almost everything stays constant, and you're getting your height off the face.
And that's why, as you said poignantly earlier, even on the higher finesse wedge shots, you're wanting to stay left or get left and stay left, even when you want it to go up in the air.
You can start to see how a lot of it, based off what the general consensus is, it really doesn't follow those guidelines. But as you said, it stands out like glaringly when you measure the best in the world. This is what you need to do, but the majority of the golfing world isn't doing
I think
that.
In fairness, there wasn't good information available for many years. So it was all based on feels or hearsay. And golf coaches just did the best they could based on the information that they had. It's not like they were trying to delude their clients. They just didn't know any better. When I think about my teaching career going back 40 years, is that there's no way that I know as much now then as I do now. And so the lessons I gave to those kids in school 40 years ago maybe wasn't or isn't as good as I could deliver it today. But I did the best I could. It wasn't like I was trying to purposefully give them wrong information or teach them incorrect things.
I mean, I think that the Pell's studies and the books and the information that he brought forward, God, is it coming almost 30 years ago now when he came out with that? I mean, that made a massive shift in the way that people approach their wedge game. And I think what you and Lane and all James Siekman and everyone who's focusing on wedge game now, I think that leap has just gone exponentially further. Now with the ability to measure what people are doing and collect the data and compare it, it's just taken to a whole new level for something that was really negated or not even paid attention to.
Well, I think so. Yeah, it was an art form that you just had to go and learn how to do, not something that could be taught. And so, and I think that's changed now, or is in the process of changing, so that people realize that you can teach people how to move their bodies and move the club differently for these different types of shots.
Yeah, so if the biggest thing to take away from this is have some shaft lean, a good 8 to 10 inches on your finesse shots.
8 to 10 degrees.
Get 8 to 10 degrees. Get the front side going up and behind you in the forward swing to shallow everything out so that you're not digging in, you're not swinging out, you're actually going to feel like you're swinging left. And then that will help lower the trajectory, launch angle down under 30 degrees, but increase your speed. I'm sorry, increase your spin up to where you're going to get it to where you can start to hit those shots like they see on TV.
Exactly right. Yeah, and I think a good message to people would be your distance wedges should look more like your full swing mechanics than your finesse wedges. Finesse wedges are different. So
is it the same on, let's say, a 75, 85, 95 yard shot, or does that start to gravitate, as you're explaining, towards more of a full swing?
It moves more towards full swing for sure. So
so it's a hybrid of both.
At 75 yards, you're probably going to be really centered, maybe 50 yards really centered with your turn, not going left, but centered. At 100 yards, you might load up. Well, you need to load up a little bit more on your trail foot, so you might move off the ball just a little bit. But still, it's important on the downswing to go left to help create the shaft lean. And then obviously the rotation of the body and connection arm to body really helps to control where the handle goes of the club.
I can just see everybody listening now. They're going to be rushing out to the golf course, and I'm sure that the comments are going to be either, boy, I'd never chipped it so good, or God, I opened up and I kept shanking it out to the right. You guys don't know what you're talking about. So if you're listening and you get into the scenario number 2, then as always, I will have Dr. Neal's info and his website and everything that he has, the ways to get a hold of him, to go see him, to get your wedges really dialed in, so that you're not cussing us up and down and saying that was all bullshit. Do you have a couple of minutes, or we do like an emergency 9, just 9 different various questions that really have nothing to do with what we just talked about, just some fun stuff to do here at the end. All right, so I tell everybody the first one, the last one, everybody gets, because they had to have some commonality, and everything else in between is just a hodgepodge of various questions. So, being from Australia, if you were to make the President's Cup team and you're walking up to the first tee, what song are they going to play for you?
Oh, the famous one that was played at the America's Cup. I'm just trying to think. I come from the land down under.
That's perfect for you. Now here's a strange one. This one we got submitted a couple of weeks back, and we've implemented this one. So, do you prefer to shower in the morning or the evening? That seems to be the leading candidate. Now, nobody wants to go to bed dirty. Do you? Which one of these two are you more? Do you hate to lose, or do you love to win?
I hate to lose.
Very strong motivator. Let's see. As an academic, you came from you were a teacher before you got into golf as a full-time profession. You obviously read a lot. What was the last book that you read?
Fiction or nonfiction?
Either one.
I'm currently reading
whatever you found very interesting.
Jack Reacher's story at the moment. Just light reading.
Oh, those are cool.
Yeah.
I watched the TV show. Yeah, it's very entertaining,
stuff,
isn't it?
I just read it before I go to bed, just to relax.
Yeah, it's great reading fiction before you go to bed. Kind of get your mind in that creative type, just free floating.
Yeah, when you deal with nonfiction mostly, then just to escape to the fictional world is not a bad thing.
Of all the places you've traveled, and you've been to a lot of them around the world, and you love to play golf. What's the best or the favorite course that you've ever played?
The top of my list of courses that I've played is Kingston Heath in Melbourne. And second on that list is Royal Melbourne. I like Kingston Heath more.
Is that right? Yeah, Royal Melbourne's that's the Mackenzie, isn't it? Where they used to play the Australian Open?
They played President's Cup at Royal Melbourne. They played Australian Open at Kingston Heath. It's just a great golf course.
Yeah, I've got to get down there one of these days before I'm too old that I can't even hit the ball around. Or I'm relying all on my wedge game to shoot a respectable score. Couple more. The number one habit that all golfers should develop. I thought this was very, very interesting for you, given that as the wide scope and range of data that you collect, and you probably are more qualified to answer this question than the overwhelming majority of people on the planet.
I would think, I'd have to say the most important habit would be for every shot that they hit, irrespective of if it's a practice shot or on the golf course, that they go through a routine. So, hands on the club the way they want to, picture the shot, practice swings, walk in, and do that even on the, even when you're practicing.
And that's because it will set the intentionality of what they want to do, and they might surprise themselves on what they're able to accomplish.
I mean, just from a practical perspective, if your practice looks like dragging balls and just hitting, but then your intention and behavior on the golf course are different, then you're not practicing what you need to do on the golf course. So the more closely you can make your practice look like the real thing, the better carryover there will be.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. So between that and the improved short game, I'm going to have all these people breaking 80 and then 70, and they'll be raving about you. As a coach and someone who's been teaching and coaching and for decades, who would be on your coaching Mount Rushmore?
Mount Rush, did you say? Yep.
Mount Rushmore. So
I think about coaches maybe differently than others. I see that there are developmental coaches, and then there are coaches who are managing a group of players, like a college coach or a national team coach. And then there are instructors who often work with the club golfer. The guy comes in and only has 2 lessons a year, and it's not.
Wonders why he doesn't break 80.
So, and then there are tour coaches who are great at managing all of those aspects that are required to be successful at the tour level. And so, if you look at my top list, so like as a technical developing coach who technically develops players, Ted Sheftick up in near Harrisburg in Pennsylvania is unbelievably good. I mean, he's 70 years old now, and he's still teaching. He's great at doing that. From a coaching perspective of a tour player, someone like a Mark Blackburn or a Khan Pullen, they're both really good at handling players at tour events, but then having a team working with them to develop all of the skills and capabilities necessary. I think what Germany's done in their developmental programs has been phenomenal. So some of their National League coaches like Uli Eckert have done an incredible job over 15 years to raise the level of German golf from just no one on tour to something like 20 players on tour now, on main tours. We're not talking about developmental tours. We're talking about DP or PGA Tour, or maybe Korn Ferry. Maybe if you include Korn Ferry, there could be 30 players from Germany on those tours. And then club professionals. I mean, Trillium Rose is outstanding. And she can relate to a whole bunch of different needs for her members and provide solutions for them. So the versatility and domain knowledge that she has allows her to be successful in that environment as well. So,
It's interesting you say that the German coaches, because it seems to be there's a number of other countries outside the U.S., even though a lot of people come to the U.S. and they bring their information as you have, and they develop it. But I mean, if you look at it in the Koreans and the development that they're doing, it started with the women professionals, and it's moved into the males. And it's just this continual increasing rise. And it seems to be that the training in those areas is different than how youngsters in the U.S. are being trained, where I think it's a cultural difference that plays a large part, that the parents helicopter parents are detrimental, as I'm sure you're well aware.
I'm not very familiar with what happens in Korea, and so my connections there aren't very strong. So I can't really comment as to, I mean, there's no doubt it's being successful, but I don't know why.
Yeah, I'm not sure what they're doing either. Outside of you just see the advancement of the ladies, and now there's a number of men that are doing the same and playing very well. I think it's great for the game, but it should be looked at what they're doing to say, hey, what are we not doing? How can we improve? A couple more, and then I let you go. I know I'm going over my time. If you were given $500 to buy anything you loved, what would it be?
Anything I loved. Gosh, you see, I don't feel like I need a lot of things, and so you go, yeah,
that's a good thing.
I would probably buy a gift for my wife, something like a spa treatment or
very smart man.
Something that she would really enjoy.
That's probably the best answer I've ever heard on that one. And then the last one, in your opinion, as far as golfers, who's the greatest of all time? Who's the GOAT?
I think,
because your career has spanned a lot.
Nicklaus is the best golfer of all time, he was able to do things that no one else could do in his generation. I mean, his record is phenomenal, and clearly Tiger Woods was on track to surpass him, but just didn't happen. Yeah,
life gets in the way sometimes.
And the best ball striker whom I've ever worked with is Rory McIlroy. Yeah,
really,
he's phenomenal.
Get his putting dialed in, and he might give chase to some of those records.
He's just too nice a guy, to be honest. I mean, you've got to have a lot of mongrel in you, I think, to keep chasing that elusive carrot or however many majors or tournament wins or whatever. And
how do you motivate yourself to continue to be at that level? And a lot of people don't understand, unless you've played at a very high level or been at a high level in your business or whatever it is, that the amount of dedication on a daily basis that you need to be as sharp as you do for world-class competition.
That's so true, Pete. Yeah.
What do you have coming up? Are you speaking anywhere? Or are you presenting in something that we can let everybody know about?
I just finished some stuff at the Mid-Atlantic PGA. Nothing until probably I start to head north in the summertime, and I'll do a bunch of wedge clinics at various clubs along the way and work with my colleagues who work at private clubs, mostly private clubs in the Northeast.
Well, I'll try to get some of the crew together around here. I mean, we got a number of the top 50 between Tim Cook and Krista Dunton and Jason Sutton and Andrew Rice is right over. I mean, Andrew lives less than a mile away and he works over. So we got a number of them. So talk to them about trying to get you up here and doing something. Awesome. And then, of course, again, I'll have all your links to everything you have, the Wedge site, the Biodynamics and everything, all the great work that you do. I'll have all that linked in as well as your social media. Doctor, I can't thank you enough for coming on. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
I really enjoy your stuff. Anytime you want to come on, you're more than welcome to come back.
So just reach out.
Perfect.
All right.
You got it.